Flanders Architectuurinstituut choose what we share as a seasonal topic, and we are concerned with spaces, practices, stories that we share that are a common concern. But the interesting thing is that Dogma, with their exhibition on the urban villa, show us actually what we don't share. We don't share yet a common vision on a definition of social housing that allows us to broaden what social housing actually is. It allows us to take cooperative living, cooperative housing and collective housing as a form that we didn't consider yet to a certain extent in the landscape in Flanders and in Brussels. And it points to that issue that we have until so far always seen housing as a mere numerical concern. Everyone knows that there are around 40,000 people waiting for social housing in Antwerp. We have around 4,000 of empty social housing units that are waiting to be renovated or in redevelopment state, and the waiting list is around 7 years currently. But to see it just as a numerical concern actually fails the potential to review what social housing types could actually mean for the city itself. The urban villa was for us a potential to go into discussion with Stadsbouwmeester in Antwerp, Christian Rapp, to understand together with Dogma of how the urban villa could actually work as a model to densify the urban environment. And we choose 3 different sites as let's say, test sites with Christian Rapp together. One in the historic city center, another one outside of the historic city center in Merksem, and another on the Linkeroever to test, let's say, the model of the urban villa, to what extent it can qualitatively contribute to the public space and the public use and amenities in these areas, and at the same time offers social housing alternatives in these areas to densify the environment at the same time. What the urban villa holds as a potential is to show a typology that allows for a certain degree of standardization within maintaining a flexibility for different user types, to different families, to different type of ownership models, etc., that has a flexibility inherent to that urban type of building. So in this sense, standardization can be also seen as a potential to solve or address the social housing issue.
Architecture is not only about nice buildings, but it's also about people. With this theme of what we share, we would like to show how people gather in spaces and how architecture actually can facilitate these more participatory processes in which the citizens are more engaged in their daily environments. Housing is very important in that scope because we always consider housing as a private issue while it's a very societal one at the same time. So through this exhibition of Dogma, we are looking at housing as a socially shared space with the inhabitants but also with the whole city itself.
The exhibition is made of, I would say, 3 main parts or components. Along the wall of the room, there is an historical overview of the type of the urban villa, an history which is constructed by redrawing 40 case studies from Renaissance until today. In the middle of the room, there are 2 large tables upon which we present 7 projects that we developed over the past years, including 3 proposals that we did purposely for the exhibition that address Antwerp. And then on one of the walls of the exhibition, there are 2 projections, 2 movies. One of the movie is a sort of portrait of 4 different cities which have been largely built through this type, and the aim is to present to the viewer of the exhibition the type of urban spaces that this typology realize. While the other video is a series of interviews that we have been conducting with, let's say, key figures on the housing debate in Belgium on the possibility, the reasons, the motivations for moving towards a more collective forms of life. We are very much interested in, let's say, combining design and research, and often our, let's say, perhaps more historical research are based on case studies and are often, let's say, developed through redrawing. We think that redrawing is a tool which is very important to provide and to generate architectural knowledge. And in this case, actually you see the drawing on the back, each case study is presented through a floor plan, which is sort of, let's say, technical drawing that present the planimetric organization of this housing typology. But the drawing above is, in fact, a colorful axonomy econometry, which in fact, on the one hand, allow us to offer a quite, let's say, uniform, I would say nearly scientific view into the architectural object, but also to establish comparison. So all case studies have been drawn in the same way so that the viewer could in fact understand dimensions, proportions, urban setting inside which each of these buildings are located.
The urban villa is a building of medium size, usually free on all sides, that has a kind of cubic form and is a multifamily apartment building. So, which means that it's not a single family house or a villa. That's why it's called urban villa, because it's much denser and more compact. Although the origin, the typological origin of the urban villa is the villa, especially the Renaissance and Baroque villa. It has its moment of glory in Europe between the late 19th century and the 20th century in different declensions, from the Italian Palazzina to the Swiss Villa Urbana to the German Stadsvilla. So there are many versions of this typology with very similar characteristics, which is interesting. And usually its impetus came from a sort of bourgeois aspirations to live in a villa, but in context, which is the late 19th century, early 20th century city, where land costs were very, very high. So the only way to have this kind of villa idea was to, in fact, densify and transform it into an urban villa. So its origins are very speculative. Also, urban villas are being often criticized for lacking a sense of cityness or a sense of urbanity, because it's true that they tend to be suburban, but we realized that looking to many examples and also to cities that were almost entirely built with urban villa, like Lausanne in Switzerland and Rome, we realized that this type offer also certain qualities. I know a lot of people, also colleagues and friends, who live in urban villas because I teach in Lausanne, in the Polytechnic School in Lausanne, which is a city that is completely built of urban villas. So I often not only met people, but I also met people in their housing in the urban villa, and I've never heard anyone complaining. They were always extremely positive. One thing that people really appreciate is that in an urban villa, usually you always face two sides, or even three sometimes, and you really have this sense of cross view or cross ventilation, which really improve the quality of housing. But there is another aspect that people appreciate, and this is really interesting. When you look at the urban villa from above, especially those that were built very speculatively, like in Rome, in Lausanne, you first think it's a very bad kind of housing because the space in between seems very narrow, very tight. But then when you actually visit the place and you experience that very narrow space in between the buildings, actually that space has a lot of qualities. Usually a very nice pocket of green space, or let's say used in very interesting ways. And in a way, the fact that the urban villa is not too high somehow protect that space very, very well. And I think that's a quality that on paper doesn't really emerge. You really think that the urban villa is the worst kind of housing type, where kind of density really compromise this space in between. But in fact, the space in between has a lot of qualities. We think that today there is a chance that the urban villa can be reclaimed as a cooperative form of housing, precisely because its scale is neither too big like a large housing estate, nor it's too small like a single suburban, single family house. And in that sense, we also presented in our exhibition a series of projects we have done in the past, but also research projects we have done recently, where somehow the speculative nature of the urban villa is twisted in its opposite, into housing that attempt to decommodify domestic space towards a more cooperative way of living.